close your eyes and pull like a dog.
And a new Irish record for Phil Healy, 22.99.
Christy Cooney hands over the Sam Maguire Cup to Graham Canty, Cork All-Ireland champions for the 7th time ever.
Hello and welcome to the Star Sport Podcast. My name is Jack McCarran of the Southern Star and I'm joined as always by Star Sport editor Kieran McCarthy. On today's podcast we're going to reflect on the remarkable career of West Cork wrestling legend Danno O'Mahony. Danno, who will be 70 years dead in November, will be known to most in West Cork for the statue erected in his honour in his home village of Ballydehob. What many won't realise is just how big an impact he had on the world of American professional wrestling in the 1930s. In a few minutes we'll be joined on the line by wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter to chat about Danno's exploits during the 30s. But first, Kieran, you've been putting your time under lockdown to good use, and I know you have some big news that you want to share and tell us about.
You're making it sound like I have nothing to do, Jack, but it couldn't be more opposite. What we want to launch on this week's Star Sport Podcast is Pitch Perfect. It's the search for the best pitch in West Cork, and by West Cork we're talking GA terms here, and we're taking in the Carbery division and the Beara division, and it just so works out, Jack, the 26 clubs in Carbery and the 6 clubs in Beara give us 32 clubs, 32 pitches, which is just ideal for a Champions League style format. So I was up early this morning writing down the names of every club in Carbery and Beara and clipping them out in a piece of paper, and I put them into the draw drum, or as I like to call it, the draw bag. People now watching the video will see me shaking a paver shoe bag full of the names of the 32 clubs involved. So what we're going to do is draw out 8 groups of 4, and from those 8 groups the top 2 will emerge, and we'll go into the last 16, and then it's like almost World Cup style in terms of knockout from there. So the top team in Group A will play the second team in Group B, the top team in Group B will play the second team in Group A, and so on and so on. So we'll have our last 16 quarterfinals, semi-finals, and then we'll have, probably in a couple of weeks' time, we'll have the grand final where we discover the best pitch, the best playing surface in West Cork, as voted for by the people of West Cork. And the beauty of this, Jack, is that how we will pick the top 2 teams from each group, and then in the subsequent knockout games, is Twitter polls. So fans and Southern Star readers can vote on Twitter when we put up a poll each morning that will run for 23 hours. They can vote for their favourite pitch. We'll be starting it off later this week. So fierce exciting. Like I said, it's going to go on for a couple of weeks, and it might help pass a few weeks too. So I think without further ado, Jack, will we just get this draw underway? Have you any questions to ask first?
Yeah, I do have a question, because obviously years of following soccer, and Irish soccer in particular, I will have sat through tons and tons of qualifier draws, championship draws, etc. And usually around this time, just before the actual draw proper kicks in, Gianni Infantino, or before him Sepp Blatter or Michel Platini, will come out and deliver some 20-minute soliloquy about how great UEFA is. So I'm just expecting Tom Lyons perhaps to walk in and maybe give us some kind of a speech about the importance of pitches in West Cork, when all the listeners and viewers really want is to find out which group they've been drawn in. So is Tom here, or will we just get on with it?
See, the kind of beauty of this Star Sport Podcast is we cut straight to the chase, we always have our finger on the pulse, and we know our listeners and those watching want us to get straight into the draw. And like I said, this bag here, it's the bag of dreams. Like, we could have the West Cork group of death in this bag right now. So,
and just one more question before you start. I just want clarity. Is there an independent observer from KPMG sitting in your living room with you right now, just to ensure everything goes off fairly, or are we just going to have to trust you?
Just going to have to trust me, because we're adhering to all social distancing guidelines and so on. So the people of West Cork and the Southern Star just have to place their trust in me. But I don't think that's an issue, Jack. Kind of the most trustworthy man you'll ever come across.
Okay, then give us the first two teams out from Group A, Kieran.
So the first 4 teams will all go into Group A, and the first team we have Randallogue.
Ooh.
Second team Castlehaven.
Ooh. Will I do that noise for every team, do you think? Is that a good idea?
That's 32 noises. The third team is St. James's. So that's Ardfield. I'm in Group A. And the fourth team is Danno O'Mahony's.
Ooh. Sorry, I didn't give an ooh for St. James's. Didn't mean anything by it, but just to keep the flow going, because we don't want too much dead air here. You seem to be struggling to get the names out of that pavers bag.
I'm just trying to be thorough with this. On to Group B, and the first team in Group B is St. Colum's. The second...
Am I meant to be writing down these as we go?
I'll get it after when you listen to the playback. The second team in Group B is O'Donovan Rossa. That's Skibbereen in there. The pitch is Skibbereen, which is underwent work. Carbery Rangers are in Group B. And also, let's see now what I have here. I know the excitement is gripping. We've Kilmeen and Kilbree. So that is Group B done. Anyway, readers can just check Thursday Southern Star for all the groups anyway. Which could be a quicker way of finding out who's in what teams. But we're just trying to be fair here. So the first team in Group C, St. Mary's. I never thought this through, Jack, did I? Gabriel Rangers are in Group C. Ballydehob are in Group C.
Oh, it's a tough group.
This is a tough one already. And the final team in Group C is Kilmackabee. So that's a tough group. That'd actually be a good group in junior A football, actually, come to think of it.
If anyone was wondering how we were going to fill air during this COVID-19 outbreak, here is your answer. We've got all bases covered on the Star Sport podcast.
So on to Group D, first team is Clownagale. Second team, which I just plucked out there as well, is Bandon. You don't need anyone from KPMG here. Glengariff from Beara are in Group D as well. They're the third team. And the last team in Group D, which is the one side of the draw, is Clonakilty Ahamilla, which has hosted Cork Under-20 Championship game and is a top-class pitch. So
for those of you still with us, we're now halfway through the draw for the best pitch in West Cork GAA. So keep with us. We'll be here probably until sunset, but we'll get there. Keep going, Kieran.
We'll get there. Group E, Argadine Rangers, the first team out. Second team is Adrigole from out west. Good to see Adrigole there flying the Beara flag. We also have Bear Island.
A big derby.
Big derby there, Bear Island, which is obviously an island, a pitch on an island, and it's the only pitch in this draw that is on an island and not on the mainland, so that's interesting. And the fourth pitch in Group E is Kilbrittain. 3 groups to go, and the excitement here in this room is at fever pitch, I have to say. Boom, boom.
My nails are totally gone.
Group F, Goleen.
Oh, I like Goleen, I have to say.
Yeah.
Great setting.
Group F. I'm just hoping I've all the clubs in here and I get there. So Donnies are the second team in Group F.
Donnies has to be a strong contender just based on the amount of big games
Island
they
Rovers. Island Rovers are there, and Bantry Blues, who have gone through some super work on their pitch. So that's a tough group. Group F. I'll watch that one with interest. And now, what's after F? E, F, G, H. No H.
H is the last group. G.
Sorry. Castletown Bear are the first team in that group.
We'll be like
St. Oliver Plunkets
St. Oliver
are the
Plunkets,
next team. Wintovara are there, and that's another club who've undergone substantial work on their pitch in recent times. And the final team in that group is Newcestown. And now onto the final group, which is the 8th group. So I just hope there's 4 pieces of paper left in my draw bag. Tide McCorrick, who should be able to shout, you would think.
I think so. I train on that pitch myself, Kieran, an excellent facility.
Barry Rowe, People can see Barry Road there. Put that up there to the
no
camera.
one can read your writing, and also with the slow internet connections we both have in our respective homes, it's very pixelated, so difficult to see.
Oran are the third team, and the final team, yes, there's one left. Last but not least, Garnish. So another Bear derby there. So I didn't keep track of what went into which group, but I will listen to the playback and I will put it up online either later today or on Wednesday. And full details will be on the Star this Thursday. And I think we'll kick it off then from Friday morning with the first Group A. So a poll will go up on my own Twitter page, which is at KieranMac_SS. The poll will run for 24 hours. Vote for the pitch that you want, that you think is best in that group. We'll pick the top 2 then at the end of the day, and they go forward to the knockout stage. We'll repeat that with the 8 groups, and then maybe this time next week we can go through the knockout stages. We'll be closer to that, so we'll give an update in next week's Star Sport podcast. But I don't know about you, Jack, but that was quite exciting. I need a break after all that.
Yeah, well, there you have it, folks. The first ever West Cork pitch perfect draw. You thought things couldn't get any more boring than the draw for the Euro or World Cup qualifiers, but I think we've run it pretty close. But anyway, we'll take a quick break just to get over all that excitement, and coming up next we're talking to Dave Meltzer about the remarkable career of Danno O'Mahony.
Thanks for listening to the Star Sport Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to all things sport in West Cork. Don't forget to pick up this Thursday's Southern Star newspaper, including our award-winning sports section with everything a West Cork sports fan could want. In shops across West Cork and online from anywhere in the world via www.thesouthernstar.ie/e-paper. The Southern Star and the Star Sport Podcast, #1 for sport in West Cork.
In August of this year, it will have been 70 years since the world lost professional wrestling legend Danno O'Mahony. In West Cork, Danno is known primarily due to the statue erected in his honour in Ballydehob, but before the statue came the career. We're delighted to be joined on the line by wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter to chat about Danno's exploits during the 30s and 40s. Dave, thanks so much for joining us today. And to kick off, I wonder, could you maybe give our listeners a sense of who Danno O'Mahony was and what kind of impact he had on the world of American professional wrestling in the 1930s?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because he was like this, kind of like, this like meteor in the sense of he came, and it was a lot in Boston, but in the Northeast. He came in, he was promoted very heavily as like the strongest man in the world. And he didn't really have a wrestling background, but he was big and had a good look and caught on immediately and became a huge star. I mean, Boston was interesting because the promoter there, Paul Bowser, was evidently like, the best promoter of that era because Boston was hopping, and he got Boston hopping with Gus Sonnenberg, a football player, in the late 20s. And then, Gus Sonnenberg's career kind of went down, and then he brought in Danno O'Mahony and had him beat, Strangler Lewis and Jim Londos and people like that. And he was the top guy in wrestling, but it was like a 2-year thing. And Danno got double-crossed in a match, and really like his star fell very quickly after that. But for the 2-year period, I think 35, 36, maybe 34, he was an incredible drawing card like they'd never seen. His big championship matches would be moved to baseball stadiums because the Boston Garden wasn't, he'd sell to Boston Garden too easily, and he drew some of the biggest crowds actually the biggest crowds in the history of American wrestling up to that point in time.
You mentioned one of his opponents from the time. That was Greek-American wrestler Jim Landis, and would I be right in saying when they actually met for a match, they had it at Fenway Park, which of course will be known to most of our listeners as the home of the Boston Red Sox baseball stadium?
Right, and that was a huge match. A couple of them, at Fenway, and I think he may have had one at Boston Braves Stadium, which was the other major league team at the time, baseball team, and a lot of sellouts at Boston Garden for lesser matches. But it was interesting because he was very limited as a wrestler himself, but he was a great drawing card. Not just Boston. It was the East Coast and everything, but it was not like it wasn't like he was worldwide or anything, but his Boston numbers were off the charts. Irish star in Boston has always been something that they've tried to push, and he was, the biggest that they ever had.
Well, you mentioned his limitations as a wrestler, so what then was impressive about Danno? Obviously, you mentioned his Irish heritage, or he was from Ireland, so that was obviously a big drawing card in Boston. But what else stood out? His size, his strength? Was he a charismatic type of a character?
I can't really say because I never saw him wrestle. It was so long ago. But what I know is that he was. They promoted him extremely well. They basically promoted him as the strongest man in the world, and these guys would wrestle him. And after the match, they would go, "Oh, he's the strongest guy we've ever been in with, and I don't know if anyone can beat him." So they would basically, like Landis, who was the biggest drawing card at the time and the biggest star in wrestling at the time. And Landis, after wrestling him, put him over with just like, "Oh, I don't know that anyone could beat him." So in the area, it's like, "Oh my God!" Like he didn't do a lot, but when he didn't sell much, it was just like he did strongman stuff. I think he was he a champion like shot putter and discus thrower? I think. I know he was.
He was a champion thrower, yes.
Yeah. So he had a legitimate. He legitimately was strong, and they pushed that as his, the thing. So it's like if you tell people the guy's strong and he does strongman stuff, people will be impressed. And the deal was he was so strong that these guys using their regular wrestling techniques could not were getting outpowered. So that was kind of like, so you can, and it's happened in wrestling since, through the years, all the way through from Hulk Hogan to Ultimate Warrior, even in recent times, or Braun Strowman, where you'll have big, strong guys, and they're very limited as wrestlers, but if the wrestlers sell the strongman stuff, people will be more impressed because they see the size. And Danno, they didn't have steroids in those days, and they didn't have bodies like that. But for his day, he was tall, and he had the good body, and he was a good-looking guy. That was like the key, is that he had the great look, and obviously, I guess he, to draw like that, I think that, again, not having seen him, but to draw like that, he would have had to have had a certain type of charisma, because there are plenty of strong guys that were put over in the same way as those guys, but the ones who made it and drew, were the ones. It's not like everybody that's strong, that was like a weightlifter at a high level that came into pro wrestling where everyone sold for him at the beginning. They weren't all Bruno Sammartino, But I guess in a sense, for a short period of time, that's what he was Bruno Sammartino, who was, like which was the Italian strong boy, was his first gimmick. But Bruno had, obviously the great longevity. And Danno, what happened with Danno is that one of the wrestlers, Dick Sheekat, double-crossed him in a match, and it just, that pretty much, it actually was, what's the word I'm looking for? It actually really hurt pro wrestling badly because, number one, Danno was hurt by losing, and then it came out, that Sheekat was supposed to lose, and he double-crossed, so it was kind of like newspaper stories came out about, the world championship being fake and things like that. So in the late 30s, in a lot of parts of the country, wrestling, it really hurt wrestling badly in a lot of parts of the country when Danno lost.
Well, just Dave, on that point then, would it be fair to say that during Dan's run as a professional wrestler in the United States, most of the fans watching were probably not aware that the results were predetermined?
I don't know that that's the case. As far as I think, okay, I would say that the fans who attended probably weren't, but the idea that wrestling wasn't real, people knew, in the 1800s, let alone the 1900s. I don't know how widespread the knowledge was. As far as Lou, it's. The newspapers certainly hinted at it, but they also covered it very heavily. So I don't know. I couldn't say the population at large, but it was enough of. I think it was more people weren't sure, and they kind of got captivated by it as much as being sure it was real. I think that they weren't. Because you couldn't really go without hearing that wrestling wasn't real, so you would have the skepticism. But I mean, still, you had that during Bruno Sammartino's era where everybody knew and they still believed in Bruno. You know what I mean? And now it's not so much the same in that regard. But still, I mean, even like Steve Austin, the people believed in Steve Austin. Even though, and Steve Austin's era, everybody knew. Even Bruno in the '70s, everyone deep down knew, but they connected with him, and I think that. Yes, I would think that more people thought it was real, and the people who probably went to Fenway Park and supported him probably thought that he was the toughest man on earth. And then, because the reality is if that wasn't the case when he lost, if they thought, well, when he lost, his drawing power wouldn't have gone down, and it did. He went from being the biggest draw in wrestling to, it was weird how it was the same way in boxing too. You would get guys, if you remember old boxing, when guys would be on the way up, they were world beaters and they could draw. And then, now it's not the same, but back there was a period where, you're a prospect on the way up and you lose, it's kind of like, oh, you're done, you lost. And I think that in wrestling with Danno, it was like, oh, he lost, he submitted. You know what I mean? It's like he was, he wasn't really that good. And so it's, obviously the losses meant, it meant something. So in that sense, to the people watching it, the wins and losses were exceedingly important. Yeah.
Dave, you mentioned names that some of our listeners will probably be familiar with, names like Hulk Hogan, The Ultimate Warrior, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Just would you be able to kind of give us a comparison? Like you mentioned, Danno's run at the top of the business only lasted around 2 years, so I suppose you couldn't compare his time in the business with the likes of a Hulk Hogan. But in terms of star power, was he on their level or was he kind of a couple of levels below?
Okay, so in the Northeast, he would probably be that level, maybe higher, because when you're talking about drawing 35 and 45,000 people to baseball stadiums, when the population was so much lower and the transportation was so much more difficult, that's to me, and it wasn't like people came from all over, like for like Hulk Hogan's big matches. So I would say, from a regional standpoint, historically, he would be bigger, and even Bruno Sammartino, who was the biggest draw probably on a local basis in Boston history, afterwards. Bruno didn't do those ballpark numbers that Danno did. Now, Bruno, of course, had far more longevity as well. So I would say at the peak of Danno O'Mahony, on a regional basis, bigger than those guys. But on a national basis, no, not as big.
Okay, Dave, I just want to kind of touch quickly on the Irish-American element within this story. In the last 10 or 20 years, Irish wrestlers have made a huge impact on the wrestling business. The names like Sheamus, Finn Balor, Fit Finlay, and most recently Becky Lynch have become major stars in the WWE. Was Danno a trailblazer in that regard, or were there Irish American wrestlers who came before him? And why have Irish wrestlers found such major success in the States? That's
an interesting question. I mean, as far as as I can remember, he was the first Irish. I mean, he was definitely the first Irish wrestler who was a star at that level. But that era of wrestling, like the history, kind of went away. But the promoters, I will say that the promoters all knew about Danno O'Mahony for the next 40 years, or whatever. So as far as the idea of bringing Irish stars to New York and Boston. Yeah, by the time it gets to the Becky Lynch era, it's a different thing. But Vince, Vince knows because from his father. His father was still from the generation that was aware of Danno O'Mahony and Hulk Hogan. The original idea of Hulk Hogan, which did not happen, was that Hulk Hogan was going to be his Irish superstar. But they decided to make him a beach bum and everything like that because of the idea that it would probably have more. And that was not Vince Jr. or, the current Vince's idea. It was his father's idea. His father was, we had, let's make an Irish superstar. We'll call him Hulk Hogan because, he wasn't Irish. But that's the reason for the Hogan name. So the father absolutely, was one of those things, the knowledge of Danno drawing and others afterwards, but Danno more than any of them, was in his mind. When it came to Vince Jr., not so much. But with Vince Jr., the idea now is to get wrestlers, from all over the world, I guess would be the way to put it, from all different ethnic groups, and the fact that there are several Irish is more due to the talent of those people. I think Seamus, to a degree, I think that the idea of kind of like, because he's so Irish, if you know what I mean. I don't think with Fit Finlay it was so much, because they never really pushed Fit Finlay at that level. And Becky, I think, was not because she was Irish, but because she connected. I don't think that there was like, oh, we need an Irish woman star. I don't think that was that at all, because Becky snuck up on them. She became a star before, the fans made her a star, where Seamus was someone that the promotion wanted. And Finn, with Finn Balor, I mean, it just happened that there was this guy in Japan, Fergal Devitt, who was an awesome, awesome worker, and he could have been from anywhere in the world, and it would have been the same. So each one of those three is or four, if you include Finlay, it's all different reasons. Fit Finlay, I think that the Irish tough guy street fighter thing, was part of the thing, but he was never pushed as a big star. He's a veteran guy who was there more to teach when he was there. But Seamus was definitely, I think because he was tall and because he had the good body and because he was so Irish.
And the ginger hair and the pale skin.
Yeah. So I think that with him, it was very much, we're going to have an Irish superstar, which is good for, the United States, and it's good for Ireland, and it's good for England, and everything like that. So I think that in his case, it's kind of like, the biggest of all is Connor. He's not obviously not a pro wrestler, but I would say in the United States, he's got to be the biggest Irish sports star. And I don't think that being from Ireland is so much of his appeal as much as he just frickin' has so much charisma and he can talk. And, I don't think, it wasn't like somebody like Dana White was just like, oh, Irish superstar. It was more like just superstar. And Becky's the same way. Becky, the fact that she's Irish is just coincidental. She just got old, she was like one of the women and just thought to be a member of the cast. And she just got over bigger because, you had Ronda Rousey there and because Becky Lynch was such a great promo. And I think that because her promo style was so much like Connor, people were like receptive to it. But that's a minor point. But Becky just got over on her own. And she's like the most, Becky would be the most popular, I think Becky would be the most popular woman star ever, realistically. Because you could say Mildred Burke, years and years and years ago. That's like in the 30s and 40s in the United States. And she was really big. But, it's a different era. It's a different era now. I would say not necessarily the best, but the most popular woman wrestling star ever in the United States. The most important, I think, is Ronda, but the most popular, I think, is Becky.
Good stuff, Dave. Just to go back then to Danno's era for a second. What was like, to your knowledge, what was life like for a wrestler back then in terms of the amount of travel they did, the amount of money they earned? How famous were they in just day-to-day life? Could they walk down the street? Could Danno O'Mahony walk down the street in Boston without being recognized?
No. He would have been a gigantic celebrity. Because you didn't have like the wrestlers then, because they were individual stars. As far as from that era, they would be like a wrestler now. They're big stars for sure, but they're not as big as like an NBA player. You know what I'm saying? Even the biggest ones. Whereas with Danno, when he was around, as far as in Boston, no, they didn't have an NBA team. Who was the big sports stars? The baseball players probably would have been big, and he would have been, because he was an individual during those 2 years. He would have been bigger than the baseball players individually, I think, or at the level of the biggest baseball players, if not. He would have been, because like Strangler Lewis was and Landis, those guys were real. They were pretty big celebrities. Landis was probably bigger than Hogan, and Hogan was real big, and so as far as I wasn't there, so it's hard to say, but my perception would be that he would be kind of at that Hogan and Rock level, as far as like a real superstar, not just a a missile, like a secondary sports star. No, he was bigger than that. It's certainly in Boston, yes.
Good stuff, Dave. Now, I know you're being very good with your time, and we're very thankful for that, but I'd just like to ask you one or two more questions before we wrap up. And the first one revolves around the Irish whip, which is a move known to all wrestling fans and will likely have a familiar ring to non-wrestling fans as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that and its significance in Danno's story?
Yeah, because so that was like his big move was the Irish whip, which later became, Whipper Billy Watson, who was a Canadian, used it, so they kept it real strong. And it was, you just like whip the guy, and the guy would take this big bump for you because the idea of you're showing your power. And later it became whipping people into the ropes, and they would bounce off and things like that. But the original Irish whip was just you whipped them and they flew, and it was a very impressive move at a time when wrestling was more looked like wrestling, like in a real wrestling match, freestyle wrestling match. You couldn't grab a guy by the arm and whip him. It doesn't work. But that was one of the moves. That was like the key move. That when I said like the guys would sell his power, that was it, because nobody ever did that. And it's like, oh my God, like the strength it would take. And like people would try it out on each other, and it's like they couldn't do it. You try to throw your friend like that, it doesn't work. So what kind of power this guy must be Superman. So yeah, that was a big part of his calling card. That was his calling card.
And that move, which obviously it doesn't look as spectacular in today's business, but it's still referred to as the Irish whip. So in many ways, is that Danno's legacy in the business?
Long term, I would say that his two legacies would be, the Irish whip for sure, and the idea of, I wonder if he was the first true ethnic super draw. And I think that, that, and if you say that, that's where your Rocca and Bruno Sammartino and people like that came from, as far as in the United States. Because if I look at the big draws, Frank Gotch was an Iowa farm boy. That's not an ethnic draw. Strangler Lewis and Stecker were great wrestlers. Londo's Greek, so I mean, you had that too. So yeah, I would say that he and Londos would be the first what you would call ethnic draws, and that is what paved the way for Bruno Sammartino and the later ethnic draws, all of them, from the next Mil Mascaras, everyone from the Mexican stars and all that. So yes, I would say that would be his two big legacies.
Okay, Dave, and final question then. You founded the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame in 1996 to recognise people who make significant contributions to the profession. I know former opponents of Danno, the likes of Jim Landis and Yvonne Robert, are inductees. In your eyes, did Danno have a Hall of Fame worthy career, or was his run in the business too short?
It was too short. To me, that's the problem. Were those Hall of Fame years? Absolutely. But it was 2 years. It's like that's where, and I think where Bill Goldberg and Ultimate Warrior and I kind of always, to be honest, I always compare Danno to Ultimate Warrior when I'm looking for a comparison. Even though Danno was bigger on a regional level than Ultimate Warrior ever was, but it's the same type of a thing where a guy came in and he was on fire and he was really big, but then it phased out, and with Ultimate Warrior it was more himself doing it. But with Danno, it was the circumstances of the time. I mean, because Danno, if he wasn't double crossed, if Danno wasn't double crossed by She-Cat, he probably would have drawn, until he got old. Because you got to remember, he came in at 21, right? So he was world champion at 22. So at the time, he was the youngest world champion ever, and to this day, Luthez is the youngest world champion ever, and Danno is the second youngest. So you're talking about a young guy. He could have had, if they would have been able to protect him, 15 years, certainly 10 years at that level. In which case, he could have been. I mean, that's the funny thing. That one match, if you take that match out, Danno would be, not just a Hall of Famer, but he would probably be looked back on as like this, like a Bruno Sammartino, as opposed to a guy who, the historians know who he is, but the name didn't really last in the United States because of the gap in time and things like that. yeah, he that's a really interesting. It's a really interesting thought about that one match. I've never thought of that match in that level before because it was just something that happened. And
can you maybe just go into a little more detail on that match? Then you've referenced it a few times. The double cross that maybe cost Danno his longevity.
Yeah. So he was in there, and for whatever reason, I don't know, it was a promotional thing or whatever. I don't remember exactly, but he got talked in. I think it was in Madison Square Garden. And they were going to have a worked match, and he was, Shekat was a legitimate tough guy, and he got him in a submission. And if you're in a submission, you're going to have to tap, and he tapped and was hurt, and everyone was stunned because Danno had been unbeaten up to that point, and it was kind of like that was it for him. If that doesn't happen, and the promoters keep putting him over, and even if maybe he lost, but was lost in a more protected way than saying I quit, because I quit was just like. In those days, like now, it's like people that watch MMA, you can tap and it's fine. We come back another day. Back then, like the big wrestlers, they didn't tap. They might get pinned. They might have a little story. They might build a rematch. Like this was a match that didn't build a rematch. It was just, it's done. And, if you didn't have that, I would say, because look, Danno, he'd have had, I think, he would have had 12 more, so it'd be to 48. So he'd probably be a star through the war, and maybe, if he connected on television, maybe a couple more years than that. And there's no way of knowing, but yes, without a doubt, if that doesn't happen, Danno O'Mahony would be remembered as one of the biggest stars in pro wrestling history, no doubt about it.
Well, Dave, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. I wish the best of health to both you and your family during this difficult time. You can read and listen to Dave's work in the Wrestling Observer newsletter and Wrestling Observer Radio, and you can follow him on Twitter at Dave Meltzer, WON. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. Great chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Star Sport Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to all things sport in West Cork. Don't forget to pick up this Thursday's Southern Star newspaper, including our award-winning sports section with everything a West Cork sports fan could want. In shops across West Cork and online from anywhere in the world via www.thesouthernstar.ie/e-paper. The Southern Star and the Star Sport Podcast, #1 for sport in West Cork.
Welcome back to the Star Sport Podcast, and as always at this time of the week we're going to take a look at what's to come in the Star Sports section this Thursday. And with the continuing COVID-19 crisis, there is obviously no live sport to preview, but that hasn't stopped us. The sports section in the Southern Star this week is 16 packed pages, and Kieran, there's some really good stuff in there as well, isn't there?
Yeah, there is, Jack. Again, it's action-packed, even though we are still without live sport, and we probably will be for some considerable time to come. But the sports section is still quite strong this week, and I'm not just saying it, but it's one of the strongest sports sections of the year, if I'm being quite honest. There's some great content in there for Southern Star readers this Thursday. We've interviews with Cork footballer Rory Dean, who's battling back from a hamstring operation that he underwent a couple of weeks ago in London. So he chats about the injury he suffered and rehabbing and the comeback trail at this stage with the effects of COVID-19. Joe McCarthy caught up with Niamh Cotter from Glengarriff, the Cork footballer, who's also battling back from a back injury that was a lot more serious than one's initially thought. So there are two good interviews there. Dennis Hurley is caught up with Ireland under-20 rugby star Jack Crowley from Inishannon. Jack Crowley obviously took the under-26 nations by storm as Ireland won 3 games on the hop to top the table before the play was halted. So good interview there. I've caught up with Fintan McCarthy, the skipper in Moore, to get his thoughts on the Olympic Games postponement until 2021. And what's interesting is that Fintan and the Irish lightweight rowing group were actually in Seville on a 2-week training camp, and they flew out to Seville just the day before Spain went on lockdown. So Fintan fills me in what it was like to be in Spain just before the lockdown came into effect. Orla Cronin is back by popular demand again this week, Jack. Orla she did our healthy banana bread recipe in last week's Southern Star, and it was proved very, very popular indeed. So she's come back this week with something a bit more savoury. It's a chicken and chickpea curry, and it looks out of this world. Like, you could actually eat the picture. It looks that good. So I think for all sport fans and non-sport fans, check out Orla's chicken and chickpea curry recipe in this week's Southern Star. And hopefully for the next couple of weeks, Orla might keep supplying us with recipes. And it's good just to keep the people of West Cork, keeping them busy. And they're all healthy recipes too, which is great. And this recipe in this Thursday, you can make food for 4 or 5 days out of it. So well worth checking that out. Also, I've caught up with Mike Doolan. He's the former Drina Rangers kind of stalwart, just for a quick catch-up. And when I touched base with Mike, it was to chat about the time when the West Cork Masters took on the Republic of Ireland Masters in Dunmanway back in 2014, just for, even though it's only 6 years ago, just for kind of a little trip down memory lane. And as it turns out, Ronnie Whelan still owes Mike Doolan €20 from a bet that they put on the night before the game. So if Ronnie Whelan listens to this podcast or reads Thursday's Southern Star, Mike Doolan still hasn't forgotten that Ronnie Whelan owes him €20. Plus, Jack, Ronnie Whelan took Mike's towel at half-time in that game because Ronnie never brought a towel himself. So not only did Ronnie Whelan take Mike Doolan's towel, but he also owes him €20. So kind of that's a huge story. Like, I expect that to kind of lead all sports bulletins for the rest of the week. But there's lots in there, plenty of great reading. Danno O'Mahony, Jack has a great story about Danno O'Mahony. Obviously, we listened to the great chat there a couple of minutes ago. That's a full page in this Thursday Southern Star. So there's plenty there for everyone, from GAA to soccer to bowling to rugby to athletics, rowing, motorsport. It's all in there. So well worth picking up Thursday Southern Star, either in a shop or online.
Yeah, and we didn't really get a chance to talk about Danno O'Mahony ourselves there because we went straight into the chat with Dave Meltzer. But just given the week that's in it, WrestleMania, for any of you wrestling fans out there, is on this weekend. So it was a timely reminder to go down memory lane with Dave Meltzer and also take a look at the life and times of Danno, because from a man from Ballydehob, he had one of the most remarkable lives you could ever imagine. So yeah, pick up Thursday's Southern Star to learn even more about Danno if you enjoyed that chat with Dave.
How big would he be now, Jack? You think of Danno, like back then he was like the big draw, kind of, he was the main man in the world of wrestling. If you kind of transfer Danno from then to now, like you said, are we talking about The Rock, Stone Cold, Hulk Hogan? Is that the kind of caliber of profile that Danno would have?
Yeah, well, Dave mentioned it there, and it kind of really blew my mind, because when you think about how famous Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock were in their day, like, even if you didn't have even a passing interest in wrestling, you knew who they were because they were all over every talk show. They were in making cameos in movies, they were on television shows, they had music videos, etc. So they were real A-list celebrities for a time, and Danno was on their level, if not bigger, in terms of the amount of people who used to come to his matches. Because what people don't really realise, back in the 30s and 40s, tickets for the matches were sold based off the poster, not the television shows. So you needed a big name on your poster to draw a big audience. So Danno would always be top of the bill on all the posters for all his matches. Whereas now, you know, they have television programs, they have YouTube channels, so they have a chance to build a character and sell tickets that way. But back in the 30s, when all they had was the poster hanging up around bus stations in various cities across the United States. So Danno's face on posters alone was enough to draw in 45,000-50,000 into baseball stadiums. And this is in a time before easy travel. There was no intercity flights in the United States, so all these people were coming from the same region. So yeah, he was a genuine superstar, and the fact that he's from only down the road in Ballydehob is mind-blowing. But anyway, that's in this Thursday Southern Star, and as Kieran mentioned, if you can't make it to the shops excuse me, on Thursday or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the Star doesn't leave shops after Thursday, as everyone will know. If you can't make it to the shop, you can pick up a copy online as well. Just go to www.southernStar.ie/e-paper, and if you don't like reading the newspaper on your computer, tablet or smartphone and you can't make it to the shop, you can also purchase a postal subscription where we'll deliver the Southern Star to your front door every Thursday for as long as this crisis continues, and maybe even longer if you want to continue having the Star delivered to your door. To avail of that subscription, just call the Southern Star front office 028 212 00, and one of the girls there will sort out your postal subscription. But Kieran, I think on that note, we'll leave it for this week. So thanks to everyone for listening to the Star Sport podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. If you enjoy these shows, please make sure to rate, review and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Acast, Stitcher, or wherever else you listen to the show.